Welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you'll know when new videos are available. I really hope you enjoy this one. So we didn't get super far last week when we were working on writing the offer, but we talked about a lot of different things and ways that it's important to make sure our offers are clean. And I'm hoping that today that we get through the entire thing or much, much deeper into it. And I have a feeling we will, but we'll see. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can just get going and get as far as we can. So here we go. What you should be looking at right now is the first page of the RPA. So last week we talked about buyers' names, about making sure the address was correct. We talked about not checking all cash if it isn't all cash. We talked about the close of escrow periods, right? The amount of days that we went through. And we even talked about expiration of offer. And I think that's where we finished off last week, is that we talked about how important it is to understand when the presentation of offer is happening, because our offers expire within 3 days, right? That's what happens. And so if we're not going to have an offer presented for quite a while, then it causes an issue if the offer's already expired, or it could. Okay. So we talked about that last week. So now we're going to continue on and we're going to talk about the initial deposit. And I still feel like, and it's weird, I see offers from outside offices, from our office, where I believe that the initial deposit is far too low for the sales prices that we're working with at this point. We are gone are the days of the $250,000, $350,000, $450,000 sales price, right? I mean, it's pretty much those are gone unless we're looking way out, away from our direct market area. So we've got to make sure that our deposits make sense, that somehow they are congruent, that they fit with the sales prices that we're working on. Okay. The idea that I can write an offer on a $900,000 to $1 million home and put a $5,000 or $6,000 deposit. And the reason I bring that up is because I saw an offer this week that was $915,000, $930,000, and the initial deposit was $6,000. So again, when we're looking at all of these things and we're talking about writing an offer that is strong, that presents puts the best foot forward in the buyer's attempt to make this purchase, initial deposit is going to be one of those very first things they look at. Now, not all agents are great listing agents, and they look at price and that's all they think about. And if you're a listing agent that's only looking at price and that's the only determining factor that you're using and showing your seller and saying this is the best offer, you've got to step outside of that and start looking at things other than just price, right? We have to look at the qualifications and all those things. That's important, right? Making sure that we have that complete offer sent when we're showing our proof of funds, and that we have the credit worthiness. We've already gone through the process and we have at least a pre-approval. But deposit, man, this is my commitment to you that I'm going to stick in this. Like, this is my skin in the game, right? That I'm saying if I act in breach of this agreement, I'm going to forfeit this amount of money to you. Okay. So my instruction to this point has always been, unless it's a requirement in the MLS where maybe the listing agent has already put, we need a 3% down, 3% of the purchase price deposit, or you get countered with it, or that's just the money that your buyer has, and you feel like that's the best way to do it, to put that as what their deposit is going to be, that 3%. At the minimum, you should be looking at what the amounts for small claims court are. And the reason I say that is because if there is a dispute between the buyer and seller when it comes to this initial deposit, if we can avoid going through mediation and arbitration because it's costly and time consuming, the best way to do that would be small claims. And anything that falls under the jurisdiction of small claims is no longer part of that mediation arbitration paragraph in the purchase agreement. Okay. So I used to always say, at a minimum, a $10,000 deposit is what you guys should be writing in this section. Now that small claims has increased their maximum to $12,500, I think at this point, $12,500 should be the absolute minimum that you're putting in for an initial deposit amount. Okay. The reason I say that is because, number one, it shows some commitment, and the majority of the sales prices that we're working within here in California, and in Southern California specifically, are going to dictate that your buyer has at least that amount of money cash wise to move forward in a transaction. And so if I can show a commitment of, hey, I'm going to put 12,500, or I get to that level of, I'm going to put something down like 3% of the purchase price, those things help, right? But I would start to suggest that for all of you, that the bare minimum in your offer should now be the 12,500 initial deposit price. Now in the chat, Melvin just wrote, well, the agents are asking for it. Right. That's what we just discussed. And if they're asking for it, that's something that you're going to have to do that. Now, if they've told you ahead of time, if it says in the MLS, or when you call the agent and say, hey, look, I'd like to present my offer, and this is the offer I'm presenting. If they tell you, well, we need to have a minimum of a 3% purchase price initial deposit, then you should write your offer that way. I'm not saying go outside of that. What I'm saying is this number of 12,500 should be your absolute minimum. You want to have a strong offer going forward, this is what we should be looking at. And if you have a buyer that, now I get some of these buyers might be working on down payment assistance and things like that, and they only have to put the 1% down or the whatever that is, fine. If that's the buyer you're working with, you have to live in the parameters of your buyer. But if you have a buyer that has money, because the majority of the buyers that are buying have to have some money at this point, then I'm telling you that for a strong offer, this should be your minimum deposit. Okay. If you have the ability to, if your buyer has the cash, and you want them to write the best offer that they can, and you've explained to them what it means and what the process is, and you want to put 3% of the purchase price in there as the deposit because you want to put the good offer forward, then by all means do it. I'm just saying that I don't think most of us have that conversation with our buyers where we're the one directing them to do 3%. We're doing it based on a reaction from a conversation from the listing agent, or because we got a counter offer that stated it. So we're just going in there and putting in a deposit amount, and we're not even explaining to our buyers what the importance is of the deposit and what the perception of the listing agent may be based on the amount of the deposit. So this is just my instruction to you guys to start looking at this as like, this is my starting number. Like, we're not going to go below 12.5 if we're going to have a chance, to get our offer accepted. Okay. Now the default for this stuff, for this deposit, is it's going to be wired. It's wired. There's no, we don't have to choose what it is. The contract as it states, unless we pick something different, is we're wiring the funds in to escrow. If your buyer needs to do something different than wire, then you've got to put that in to the offer. Okay. See where it says here, within 3 business days after acceptance by wire transfer, or if my buyer is insistent on doing a cashier's check, then I have to click the box that says cashier's check. Okay. If I don't check that box that says cashier's check, and my buyer tries to go to escrow with the cashier's check, escrow is not going to accept it. And we're going to have to go back to the bank and do the wire transfer anyway. So if I were you, and the other thing is when there's cashier's checks involved or whatever, there's just different, we don't want to see the check. Like for whatever it is, if they're going to do a check, then they're going to go directly to escrow. They're not giving it to you. We're not forwarding it. We're not doing anything, because if we handle the check, there's all kinds of different rules we have to follow and steps we have to take with it. And it's just not something that we do anymore because it's so uncommon that we handle the check. So you're not going to take the check from your buyers and take it to escrow. Your buyers have to go directly with that cashier's check if that's what they want to do. So it's important that you direct your buyers to make sure that they're using the wire transfer, and make sure it's a wire transfer. We've had a number of cases where buyers are going in and trying to do an ACH, right? Which is like when you pay your bills online. That doesn't work. So it has to be a direct wire. Okay. Okay. Questions about the deposit? No? Okay. If you guys have any questions, remember, just raise your hand, put it in the chat, and I'll get to you as soon as I can. So that's the deposit. Okay. Increased deposit. We're not going to go into that because we're talking about writing a strong offer, but what an increased deposit would be is if, for example, like we stated earlier, listing agents are now requiring 3% of the purchase price deposit. Let's say that your buyer doesn't have the full 3%. And usually when this happens, the full 3% is because your buyer is getting their money, the majority of their money for this purchase from a 401k, right? They're borrowing it from the 401k to purchase their property. And in order to borrow from your 401k, you have to have an accepted offer. Okay. So let's say, for example, that your buyer only has the 12,500, but the seller is requesting a 3% of the purchase price for this 850, and that 850, because my math is terrible, times 3% is 25.5. So, right, another $13,000 is required. Based on what I've done, I can do an increased deposit. And what's going to happen is now it's going to add the form IDA, and I'll show you real quick. It's going to add this form IDA. And what the IDA does is it talks about the increased deposit of how much. And in this case, it's going to be 13,000, right? Oops, I didn't put enough zeros there. It's going to be 13,000, and our combined deposit is now going to be 25,500. Put too many fives. I'm struggling with my typing today. So that's going to show what our new deposit's going to be. And by doing this and what date we're going to put this in, obviously we did this once before. We got to change all this stuff. The dates. By putting that in, it's saying, here's the date that I'm going to deposit the funds. And it makes all of this subject to the liquidated damages clause. That's all it does. So if you have to use it, if you have to use the increased deposit, and that's the most common reason why I would have to use increased deposit, that's the steps that we have to take. So any questions about increased deposit? I don't think we need to spend much more time on it than that. Anybody? No? All right. All right. I'll explain when and why IDA will be used. Okay. The increased deposit is only if my initial deposit is the initial deposit that's required in this transaction is more cash than I have at the moment that I'm writing the offer. And I will have the availability of the additional monies at a later date. So I want this all to be part of my initial deposit, which makes it part of liquidated damages, which increases, again, my commitment to this purchase. That's when I use the increased deposit addendum. Okay. So if I need a $25,000 deposit, but I only have $15,000 right now, but 2 weeks from now, I'll have the other 10 available to increase my deposit to match what the requirement is that the listing agent and seller are asking for, that's when I would use it. Okay. All right. So let's look at financing, the loan amounts, first interest rate, points, all that stuff. Let's look at it. So obviously in this case, let's say, for example, that I'm going to be doing a 20% down loan, right? So times 20%. Again, my math is terrible. That's 170 minus 12,500. So my deposit down here is going to be, oops, I have to do it here. Sorry. My loan is going to be 850 minus 170 is $680,000, right? So I'm going to have an 80% loan. That's what this is. Don't worry about putting the percentages. This is just showing for calculation purposes. This is the part that makes sense. That is we're going to rely upon. $680,000 down, right? That's my loan amount on a conventional loan. By default, the contract is conventional. I don't need to check anything. I don't need to change anything. Okay. Now, the thing that's important that we all miss, and this is important for me to talk about when we get to this point, and I do it every time we're in this section, is it is necessary for us to have a number in this box, not to exceed a certain percentage. What that is it is my buyer's commitment to remain in this transaction and close this transaction as long as my interest rate for my first trust deed does not exceed this percentage. Okay. So what happens for most agents is they either leave this blank or they put the number of exactly what the lender told them they were qualifying for. And especially, I mean, historically, we've always needed to have some kind of cushion. But right now, with rates sometimes going down, sometimes going up, we never kind of know where we're at. There could be some changes to the interest rate that your buyers end up getting by the time they get the full approval. So, for example, if right now you're getting a 7% interest rate from your lender for your this loan specifically, microphone just go out right now. Sorry, I think I unplugged for a second. Yeah. So if, for example, I'm getting 7% from my lender, that's what my buyer's rate was quoted at 7%. And we're writing an offer now to get that offer accepted. At the minimum, I need to increase my interest rate, the interest rate that my buyer's willing to accept so that they're committed to this transaction. I have to add at a minimum 0.25%. I think to be safe that I'm always going to add a 0.5 point to whatever it is they've been quoted. Now, what happens is now between our acceptance and my final approval on the loan, if the interest rate fluctuates between that 7 and 7.5, I'm still committed to make the purchase. Okay. Now, if, for example, I got quoted a 6.75 interest rate and I leave it at 6.75. Okay. If I leave it at 6.75 and my interest rate goes up to 6.85, at that point for that buyer, I am no longer committed to move forward with this transaction. So that means that even if I've removed all my loan contingency, my appraisal, my inspection, everything, the buyer has the right to cancel. They have the right to walk away. So what I always say for you guys as buyer's agents is it's a little confounding when I hear from you the response of when it's time to remove contingencies or to do things like this, like put a maximum interest rate in, that your intention is to say, I'm worried that my buyer is going to lose their deposit. Number one, that should never be a concern of ours. As long as we follow the terms of the agreement, we work within the contingencies and we work within the contract that we've committed to, the chances of your buyer losing their deposit are very slim. Now, if your buyer does something out of pocket where they've, removed all contingencies and then just say, screw it, I don't want to purchase anymore, which happens sometimes, then at that point, they kind of deserve to lose their deposit. And I think for you as buyer's agents, because for a listing agent, it's harder work to go find a seller, right? And take a listing, right? Because it's more time consuming. I have to have great presentation skills. I have to do all of these things. I have to have different market knowledge. I feel like I have to be more confident as an agent. It's harder, it's longer, it's more intense work to get the listings. But once I have the listing, let's be honest, up until now, for most listing agents that have taken a listing, they've had to do nothing but put that house on the market and it's sold. Now you've got to be good at negotiating and doing all those things. I get it. But it's still a lot easier to put your listing in escrow than it is to pick up a buyer and go put that buyer in escrow. You work very hard with that buyer, right? Because I take a listing, that listing sits in one place. I don't have to drive that listing around to let buyers see it. But if I go with a buyer, I got to go drive out to who knows where. I got to use my gas, spend my time. I got to show them probably, I would guess that some of you guys have been showing buyers for 3, 4, 5, 6 months before you get an offer accepted, some of you. Why would I want to give my buyer an out that they don't need if they're supposed to be committed? My intention is to protect them from things happening to them, not to protect them from them doing something to themselves. And that's just my opinion. So I think that the thought process that we have as buyer's agents where, I don't want to remove contingencies because I don't want my buyer to lose their deposit. Hell no. I want a strong, committed transaction. And if it's time to remove contingencies, I'm going to tell my buyer to remove contingencies. If my buyer doesn't want to remove contingencies and they get a notice to perform and the deal falls out, the deal falls out. If my buyer removes their contingencies and then does something dumb that causes them to put their deposit at risk, that's not my fault. That's their fault because I did my job. Okay. If it's time to remove their contingencies and there's issues where we can't do it, then guess what? I'm going to request extensions and do those things. But I'm not going to at all costs protect their deposit, especially if they're doing things against my advice and against their own best interests. Okay. So I don't want to allow this to be blank or have a number that doesn't make sense because I don't want to get to the end of where we've gone through everything. We've negotiated all the steps. We've come to an agreement on how the condition of the property is and where the price is and all of that, and have my buyer go, that's not the interest rate I run, I'm out. So I'm going to make sure that interest rate is a quarter or a half a point increased over what they're getting. So in the chat, somebody says, how do I explain this to my buyer? Terrific question. The benefit to you is this. Again, as part of writing a strong offer, we're showing the listing agent that even though you may have received an interest rate quote on your pre-approval of 6.75% or 7%, you're so committed to completing this purchase that you're willing to go up to a maximum interest rate of 7.25%, which is half a point over your agreed upon or your pre-approval amount on your interest rate. Now, it is not a commitment to pay that. It doesn't mean that we've done that now your lender is going to increase your interest rate. That's not what it means. It just means that if there are fluctuations in the rate, which we know has been a little bit volatile in the last few months, is that if you go over that 6.75 at any amount, then you're still committed to this. But what happens from the listing agent side, and the reason we have to do this is if they see 6.75, and that's also what it says, your maximum interest rate is 6.75 on your offer, and on your pre-qual, it says there's a 6.75 interest rate. Their fear is they have to fear that if that interest rate increases, even if you've removed all your contingencies, you're going to walk away. So they have to consider that when they're taking your offer into consideration and presenting it to the seller. They have to consider that there's a chance that this deal still falls apart even after you've removed all your contingencies because you won't commit to any fluctuations in the rate. They need to understand, so that's the conversation you have to have with the buyers. They have to understand that all these things that you're doing for them are in their best interests. If we don't have the ability to have that conversation and make this clear, right? Give them clarity on the decisions that they're making based on our advice, then they're going to push back on that stuff. I'm going to give you an example. We had an offer here where a buyer wrote an offer on one of our listings. They put, and this was a few years ago when interest rates were really, really super low, but they put like a 2% interest rate, and they they convinced our listing agent, no, 2%, we're going to get it. He's a family friend and all these things. The lenders promised us he's going to buy down rates and he's going to get us 2%. He made promises to the listing agent. Listing agent accepted the offer without countering. Guess what? The rate at approval was higher than 2%, of course. And the buyer said, we're going to cancel because we're not going to pay more than 2%. And they would have had every right to do it. They were able to figure it out, get them a loan that made sense. The lender and the buyer's agent worked on that. We didn't have much to do with it, but they were able to save the deal. But that buyer could have walked away and there would have been no recourse. None, zero. So it's important, guys. I just need you to know that. And for listing agents that know what they're doing, they're going to understand what you're doing when you write this offer this way. Now, on the other side, there's going to be listing agents that don't know what they're doing, and you're going to send an offer that looks like this, and they're going to send you a counter offer that says maximum interest rate to be BPR or best prevailing rate, right? That's what they're going to do. And you have to then make a choice, right? That listing agent doesn't know how to protect their seller, so that's not your problem. Obviously, it puts your closing an escrow with this buyer in jeopardy because the buyer will now have an out if they need it. But we don't have much that we could do when we get a counter that's best prevailing rate. But I should never see an offer that's written by anybody that says BPR in that section. Okay, best prevailing rate. The reason why is, when is the best prevailing rate? Best prevailing rate when the offer was accepted, best prevailing rate when I got full approval, best prevailing rate when I got preliminary approval, right? So it doesn't make sense. Plus, this calls for a number. If I try to type anything else in there, I mean, it looks ridiculous. It's asking for a percentage. BPR percentage? No, this is a number. Okay. So find out whatever your rate is that they're being quoted at 0.25% at a minimum. 0.5% is much safer. Okay. Any other questions about the loan amounts? Oh, let's sorry, I was started to jump ahead already. Okay. Most buyers aren't paying any points right now, but if your buyer is paying points to get a rate, make sure that you at least acknowledge that they're going to be able to, that they are paying some points there, right? So if they're paying one, just put 1.25 or whatever, but most buyers aren't paying any points right now. Like I said, this is by default a conventional loan, okay? If this is not going to be conventional, then you have to make sure that you're checking off what it is, FHA, VA, or what other type of financing it may be. Now, if this is one of those, like a down payment assistance or something like that, most of those down payment assistance programs are off FHA. So it's an FHA loan. It's going to include the FHA bundle added to it, right? Everything that's required for an FHA and a VA loan, those things are going to be added automatically. Make sure that they're filled out properly. But if it's some kind of special loan program, because they took away that additional additional financing terms, they replaced it with additional credit terms. We're not going to put it there. We're going to have to go all the way down here, and we're going to disclose here what kind of special program that the buyer's qualifying for. We have to disclose that because a lot of times those special programs are requiring a little bit longer time, right? So we have to do that. Okay. For I-10, do I write it in other, or does it count as conventional? I to be honest with you, I don't know what the structure of the I-10 loans are. So if it is a conventional loan, leave it as conventional. If it is a special program that may take longer because it's based on I-10, then I would disclose that it is an I-10. Where do I ask for 2-1 buy down? We're going to get to where all the credits are in a moment. Okay. So we'll get to that in a minute, but let's look at the forms real quick. I want to just show the FHA VA mandatory clause. We have to make sure we put the sales price in here. So in this case, the sales price is $850. So if this was going to be, an FHA loan, we'd have to include this form and we'd have to put the sales price in there. You have to put it in there. I still see, as I start to review offers, that people are leaving that blank. You can't leave it blank. It has to have a number in there. And if yours is blank, escrow is going to have you do one anyway. But I would prefer for you guys that you're doing it properly and you have the FHA VA a mandatory clause in there already. Okay, so that's the financing. Let's move on. Okay. And for these, If it's FHA or VA, deliver a list of lender required repairs in 17 days. There is no separate form for lender required repairs any longer. So it's done on a request for repairs. So it's important that we get our FHA and VA appraisals done as soon as possible so that we can do one request for repairs instead of trying to negotiate multiples. Additional financing, we're going to skip that because I don't think there are anybody that is doing second trust deeds right now at the purchase level. Maybe those will come back someday, but right now we can skip over that. The occupancy type, by default, it is primary residence, right? I'm buying this as my primary residence, or if I'm checked as a secondary or an investment property. If it is an investment property, please be honest and check the box that it's an investment property. Please do that because it's important. If this turns out to be an investment property and we're not dealing with it like it's an investment property, right? Interest rates are different for investor properties than they are for primary residence. So let's be clear. Let's be transparent. Let's not try to hide the actual purchase from the lender, if you know what I mean. Okay. All right. So now this balance of down payment, this is the difference between your purchase price, your deposit, and your loan amount. This is what's left over. So if you take this plus this, that should be 20% of the purchase price, which is your 20% down payment. That's how this is all going to work. You just want to make sure that the math adds up. Okay, that's it. Now, we do everything online nowadays. It does the math for us. Generally, it's always going to work, but please just double check and make sure your numbers are what they're supposed to be. That's all, just so it makes sense. Please make sure your buyer initials at the bottom of the page before you submit this offer. Okay. All right. Now, Melvin had asked for the buy down. It's going to go here. The amount you need for closing costs. This is the credit from the buyer, and this is only for closing costs, right? So please make sure that whether it's a 2-1 buy down or it's just for their closing cost credits, this is the amount here, and find out what the exact amount is. So almost, I don't know, I was going to say almost daily, but it's not that often. I would say 2-3 times a week, there is some offer that comes across my desk where somebody is asking for an exorbitant amount of closing costs. Right. I mean, as a matter of fact, we had, I was helping an agent that was negotiating, doing counter offers on a listing of theirs. And somebody had asked for $50,000 credit for closing costs. Okay. $50,000 credit for closing costs. Now that was including the buy down, right? To do that. That's a lot of money. And I don't think they needed the entire 50,000, but the reason that they asked for 50,000 was because the lender told them, oh, you can get 6%, you can get 8% right now, maximum in closing costs. And that's great that the lenders are allowing for these maximum in closing costs. And I think the reason they've done that is they've expanded the amount of concessions that they're allowing the seller to pay, because they understand that now the buyer's agent's commissions are part of concessions, sometimes the way it's structured. So I think that's why they've adjusted it. But they're not going to approve a closing cost credit if your total closing costs aren't that amount. So don't just go by a percentage that is the maximum a lender will allow. Sit with your lender and say, okay, what is the exact amount that we need for the buy down and for the rest of their closing costs? And ask specifically for that amount. Because when I get your offer and it's asking for $50,000 or $60,000, I think I saw one that was like $70,000. If I get that, and even if that's not what you need, I have to, as listing agent, when I present it, I have to tell my sellers, okay, well, they're offering $850,000, but they're asking for $70,000 back in credit, which means we're really selling for $780,000. And immediately that hurts. So I understand that buyers are going to need closing costs, or that buyers are doing programs for 2-1 buy downs to get better interest rates, and things like that are happening, and we have to request them. But just make sure that the amount you're requesting is the exact amount you need, or as close to it as possible. Don't just go with the highest amount allowable, because again, I have to present it as if that's exactly what we're going to pay. Because if I get 2 offers that are the exact same sales price, both putting, 3.5% down, both of them doing some kind of a buy down, and one of them is asking for $60,000 or $70,000 because that's the maximum allowable, and the other one is asking for 42,300 because that's exactly what they need. Well, guess which one just took precedence? The one that's almost $30,000 less in credits. Even though the one that's at 70 probably needed $25,000 or $30,000 less in credits, it was just a lazy buyer's agent that was asking for the maximum allowable credit. So do you guys see the difference in how we structure those credits, right? It's just everything is perception. And again, the more I can communicate as buyer's agent, the better, right? If I can have conversations with the listing agent and ask questions and not try to avoid them, I think there's like a 50-50 thing that happens between listing agents and buying agents. 50% of the listing agents are not helpful, right? I'm not going to tell you what you need to do. I'm not going to guide you on what's important for my seller. None of that. The other 50% are like, what do you need to know? I want to get this sold, right? And all of you guys as buyers agents have dealt in the past with an agent like that, where it's just like, what do you guys need? What do you need? Tell me what you need. I'm going to try to make this happen because I want what's best for my seller, right? And then 50% of the buyer's agents are just like, well, listing agents don't tell you anyway, so I'm not going to ask. I'm just going to send it, right? So keep in mind that communication is important. Don't be afraid to ask just because you're afraid to have a listing, or just because you believe a listing agent's going to tell you. I can't tell you that. I don't care. If they say they can't tell me, they can't tell me, but I'm still going to ask. I have to do what's right for my buyer, and I have to try to write the best offer I possibly can. That's my job. Okay. So on this one, we do the credit. Let's say the credit is $35,000. It's part of a 2-buy down for closing costs. I can put in here, hey, just so you guys know, the reason I'm asking for so much closing costs is, that we can put in here the 2-1 buy down, right? That the buyer is doing a rate buy down, that's what the additional closing costs are there for. That's fine. Disclose that to them if that's what it is. If it is just generic closing costs, right? I just need, $8,500 to finish off this loan and get the last of the closing costs paid for because they don't have it available to them, then that's what we're going to ask for. Okay. Any other questions about credits? Remember too, with credits is that just because you ask for it doesn't mean you're going to get all of it. And that's another thing that we have to make sure that we're aware of when we talk to the buyer. I talked about it from the side of the listing agent, where they have to calculate it as this is cutting into our net. You also have to explain to your buyers that just because we ask for $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 and the seller agrees to pay $10,000, $12,000, $15,000, if the lender will only allow a lesser amount, that's all we're going to get. And they have to be prepared for that, because if we don't have that conversation with them, then guess what happens? We get buyers that are like, well, I want my money. I want my money. And then we have to explain to them, well, it's not really your money. It was a money that was getting paid on your behalf. And you don't need all of that money to get paid on your behalf because the credits don't equal that. The closing costs don't equal that. So please make sure that you're clear with your buyers from the very beginning about that. Okay. Here we go with compensation. This one is still, I'm amazed at the amount of offers and buyer representation agreements that I see that are, basically not enforceable. Okay. So when we're doing this now, the first off, make sure the box is checked. Every day I see an offer where this box isn't checked, but there's an amount of compensation here. Okay. Please make sure that box is checked. That's the first thing. Secondly, the amount of compensation that goes into this section on the RPA, paragraph 3G3, cannot exceed the amount of compensation that you have agreed upon with your buyer in the buyer representation and broker compensation agreement. Okay. I'll repeat it again. The amount of compensation that is in this box in paragraph 3G3 cannot exceed the amount of compensation you are being paid by your buyer in the buyer representation and broker compensation agreement. That's it. It's something that all of you need to understand. I have seen in the last week 2 offers that escrow closed and got paid, and the purchase agreement had 3.5% in the commission, and the BRBC had 1.5%. And nowhere in that transaction did we see a modification of terms for the BRBC, a amendment from escrow about the compensation that was being paid, or even an amendment or addendum that may have addressed it, even though those wouldn't be the right forms to address it. Nothing in the transaction. So the idea that that buyer got paid, the buyer's agent got paid, makes them very, very lucky. And I know I sound like a broken record, and I don't want to be all doom and gloom on it, but one of you guys, and I don't mean you specifically, I mean agents in general, one of you is going to ultimately be that one where it's the perfect storm, that the escrow knows exactly what they're doing, that the listing agent and listing broker know exactly what they're doing, and you're going to go through a 30-day escrow, and you're going to close that 30-day escrow, and they're going to say, oh, by the way, your BRBC was incorrect. We're not paying you. And you're not going to have a leg to stand on to fight it. Okay. So please, if there's one thing you get from today and anything that I ever tell you, please understand that it's imperative that you guys know how to fill out the request for the compensation correctly, and your BRBC or even your PSRA is filled out properly. Okay. So here's the thing. Now, the contract, the way it is, the way that contract is, it doesn't require you to show proof of the BRBC. Now, when we started this thing almost, a year ago in July of last year, when we started this whole thing, there was a form that was introduced called the SPBB. Doesn't exist any longer. But that SPBB was the form that the buyer and seller agreed that the seller would pay that obligation of the buyer's agent to compensate the buyer to compensate the buyer's agent. And on that SPBB, it said, if the buyer's agent and buyer do not have a BRBC, they can't get paid. Okay. And we had to provide that at that point because of it. Now with the change where that SPBB doesn't exist, and all of the terms are addressed in paragraph 3G3, it says seller agrees to pay out of transaction proceeds blank % of the final purchase price, and if applicable, any other things, bonuses or whatever, or if checked, a flat rate toward the obligation of buyer to compensate buyer's broker. Buyer affirmatively represents that at the time this offer is made, buyer has a written agreement with buyer's broker that is valid, covers the property, and provides for compensation for no less than the amount stated above. So what this is saying now is your buyer, remember, it's not you requesting this, it's the buyer is requesting for the seller to pay it. So if the buyer is now affirmatively saying, I have an agreement that's valid, that covers the property we're purchasing, and that the compensation that's in this number, that's in this box, is the same as what's on my agreement. I don't have to show you, but I'm telling you I have it. So if the seller now pays out the compensation and for whatever reason finds out that there was no agreement in place that matched all of those terms, the seller could then not only go after your seller could go after your buyer to pay them back for the difference in the compensation or for all of the compensation. If that were to happen, then guess where the buyer would then turn around and would say, hey, wait a minute, you knew that I was doing something that wasn't correct and that I was representing that I had something that I didn't. You didn't protect me. Now you're going to pay me the money that I lost. Okay. So again, we rush through the things that we do. We take zero time. We don't read the contracts that we're filling out. We just kind of throw things in. And I have so many conversations with agents where they're not even trying sometimes. to do these things correctly. They unfortunately know that they'll just come to me and I'll fix whatever mistakes they've made because I'm going to review the offer before they send it. And then there's those that just don't care and they send the offer and then ask me to review after when there's nothing I can do to help them. But I just really hope that all of you take this super seriously, because this is your professional career going forward. And I don't want anybody that's watching this video or anybody that's on this live class or even anybody that's under this umbrella of this brokerage to ever have to go through the fact that they worked hard and didn't get paid because they made a dumb mistake. Okay. Questions? Any questions? Nope. All right. Perfect. Let's move on. Verification of all cash. Default is attached. If this is all cash, please promise me you're going to send proof of funds with your offer. Same thing with the verification of down payment and closing costs. If I'm not asking for a credit and I have the down payment and I have my closing costs, I need to send that proof of funds with it. If am getting a loan, whatever I have, whether it's a pre-qual, pre-approval, DU, fully underwritten approval, I need to send it with my offer. It's part of the contract. And when I see these completed transactions where the buyer's agent is not including this stuff in their transaction, it boggles my mind, because if there's ever any question about anything happened with the financing, we have nothing to go back to see what happened. Neither do they as an agent. So please make sure that everything that is in 3H, right, the verification of the funds and the verification of your loan application, is attached to your offer, period. Okay. We don't need to change those timelines. That needs to go. If that is not there with your offer, then you are not submitting the strongest offer you possibly can for your buyer. Lulu raised her hand. She has a question. So go ahead, Lulu.
Hi, Kyle.
Hello.
Okay. So going back to the commission, let's say that I have a BRBC signed with my buyer and it's 3%.
Mm-hmm.
And then I find out that they're paying 4%. So how do I go? You say that I can't get paid more than 3%?
You can modify your BRBC with your buyer, but then you have to go to your buyer and say, I know you committed to pay me 3%, but now the seller is going to pay me 4%. So I want you to agree that I could get paid 4%. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that you can't sell that to your buyer, but if I was a buyer and my buyer's agent came back to me and said, hey, guess what? The seller's going to pay me 1% extra for representing you. Can we address that and you give me that extra 1%? I, as buyer, would be like, well, wait a minute. You committed to 3% to work for me for 3%. What if we use that 1% to get me a better sales price?
Okay.
I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm just saying you better have a really good conversation and a way to sell to them why they're going to agree that you get an extra 1% while they pay full price for the house.
Right. But it goes either way. It can go either up or down. Like
sure, absolutely.
At 3, and they're only paying 2, so I still need to go back to them to get paid less.
Well, right? Yeah, or you could stick to it and say, hey, you guys committed to pay me 3. So you're going to have to pay me 1%. I mean, all of this is your conversations from the very beginning. This is, again, right. This is where we have an issue with buyer's agents and this new BRBC. I know for a fact that agents are not doing buyer consultations. They're still doing business as usual, where they just bring a buyer in, have them meet with the lender, go and try to write offers. And then when they write offers, they're getting a BRBC signed, and they're doing it because, well, I have to have one to write an offer for you. No, you have to have one to show them properties. And so we're not going through the process the proper way, where they understand that if they have to pay, they have to pay. Now, if we have a buyer that says, I don't have the cash to pay, but I want to say, hey, you should get paid 3%, that's fine. But then what that states is that if the offer is not paying, if the seller's not paying 3%, they don't get that house. That's what that part of the BRBC is stating. Like, if you're offering to pay me 3 and we can't get 3, then technically you don't buy that house. We have to move on to the next one. unless I choose to modify the thing. And you could tell them, you could put in there, I will modify the BRBC to the amount that I get paid from the seller. That's fine. That's fine. You can do that. But it's just the flip side of trying to convince a buyer that you pay me more because the seller said they're going to pay more. It's just, that's just a tough sell, I would think, but go for it. Someone said, how would you handle if your buyer tells you that my buyer doesn't want to pay me more? I wouldn't even ask them. That's just me. If I had got my buyer to commit to 3, I'm not going to go back to them and say, hey, you need to pay me more for doing my job. I mean, that's what I committed to. I made a commitment to them like they did to me. And if I want to make a business decision to lower, chances are I'm not going to ask them to adjust it up. That's just me. If I were a buyer's agent right now, I wouldn't. I've negotiated with you. You and I came up with an idea of what my value is, and that's my value. And if I get you 3 and they want to offer 4, then I'm going to use that to your benefit and say, hey, look, I knew I was going to get 3 for this. So now I'm going to go back to the listing and say, listen, I don't want the 4, but is there a way we could work that into either some credit for my buyer or a reduction in the sales price by a point? Right? Why not? That's going to make me I'm going to get more referrals from that buyer that way than, hey, you pay me a 1% more. Let's see. If we sell a listing and he pays 3% plus, okay, yeah, but I mean, he is offering 3%. It's fine, but you guys have to still ask what's being paid. And if your buyer representation agreement is at 2%, you're still going to have to go back to your buyer and ask for an increase. Go for it. If you can sell it, go for it. Can the buyer say I committed 3%, but the seller's willing to give you 1%, charge me 3? 2%. Yeah. The buyer can, as long as the buyer is committed to it, the buyer is on the way to pay that. How do you state 3% plus bonus? Again, you're going to have to modify the BRBC to include that bonus amount. Okay. So you have to include that bonus in there in the BRBC if they're offering it to you. Okay, so we're at 11:54. Let me see. Okay, let's finish J and K, paragraph 3, J and K, real quick, and we'll go there. Where do you use the plus bonus in the? No, you do a modification of terms to your BRBC to include that amount. Okay, for that, someone saying, well, where do I get that bonus? Where do I add it? You'd have to do a modification of terms to the BRBC to do that. Okay, so final verification, that's your walkthrough. By default, it's 5 days. We don't need to change that. Please make sure you're trying to do your final walkthrough as close to that 5 days prior as possible. Okay. And finally, K, assignment request. You have the ability in the first 17 days to request an assignment. That's it. You have the ability to request. The seller does not have to accept assignments, but you have the ability to request in those 17 days. So I'm going to stop here because it's almost 12 anyway, and I don't want to get into the middle of something and then have to cut it off and start from the middle next week. So what we're going to do is we're going to stop here. We're going to continue next week, and I am certain that we will finish writing the offer next week. Any questions before I let you guys go? Any questions? No? All right. So thank you guys. I appreciate you guys being here. I'm hoping that Maribel has a question. Go ahead, Maribel.
Oh, I forgot to ask Kyle on the, what is it, the ADA, the first one, the one when the customer, the buyer doesn't have the funds and you're going to request, for example, from the 401k. Do we attach also proof of the 401k?
Yeah, that's going to be your proof of funds. Yeah, absolutely. Your proof of funds is going to be the balance of that 401k. Yeah, okay. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, any other? Oh, go ahead, Alba.
Hi, Kyle. This question is similar to Maribel's. If my client has the down payment but doesn't have the closing costs, but he knows that he's getting the closing costs from the 401k, but he doesn't have it just yet in his account. Is it I guess it says attached to the offer, and then it has like 3 days after offer is accepted,
Your
or
your proof of funds is still the 401k.
oh,
Like
okay,
just remember that all this is where my funds are coming from. It's not, you're not changing your initial deposit. All you're doing is saying that the funds for my closing costs, the funds for my down payment are coming from this account.
oh, I get it. Okay,
Most listing agents and everybody else are going to understand, oh yeah, they need to accept that offer to get that money out. So no, that's just your proof of funds is just
got it.
the balance of that 401k.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Anything else, guys? No? All right. I appreciate you all being here. Thank you so much for spending an hour with me every week. And this will be on YouTube later today. If you missed any of it, if you want to review it, if you know somebody that should have been on here or want to see these videos, please share my YouTube channel and all the videos that I have, share them with people. The more people that see them, the easier our jobs become, because everybody becomes a little bit more educated. So with that, I thank you guys so much. Take care of yourselves, be productive, and I'll see you soon.